Hey guys, how are you? So last week I put a post up on my Instagram feed about ketogenic diets, on what it is, and I just wanted to kind of give you a bit more information today about what makes up a ketogenic diet and who it might be useful for, what the literature says, and my overall recommendations about it. So firstly, what is a keto diet? Well, essentially it is a very high fat diet. It is moderate in protein and very low carbohydrates as well. So it results in a shift from our energy metabolism from carbohydrate usage to fat. So our body's primary fuel is carbohydrates, and when we're restricting carbs, we shift over to the use of fats. So one of the common problems that I see with people that are attempting to follow these ketogenic diets, and particularly amongst those in the fitness community, is that they are adhering to the low carbohydrate requirement, but the proportion of fats to proteins is grossly incorrect. Now, carbohydrates should be making up around 5 to 10%, and I see this. But protein should only be around 25% of your total caloric intake. Fats should be making up the majority of around 70%. So anything lower than this, when it comes to fat intake, then you're simply not going to be having the ketone production necessary to be considered a ketogenic diet. And I'll explain this in one moment. So a ketogenic diet is essentially a low carbohydrate diet that focuses on adapting to fat use and ketone use as our main source of fuel instead of carbohydrate. Now, we know that our body's primary fuel source, or the preferred fuel source, is carbohydrate containing foods. So in the absence of these, your body will produce these compounds in the liver called acetone or ACETO-ACETATE or BETA-HYDROXY butyrate, and these circulate in our bloodstream and are metabolized and used as energy in our skeletal muscles. But most importantly, they're required for our brain to function. Normally we need glucose for our brains to actually operate. So whilst fats is our secondary energy source, proteins are our body's tertiary energy source. But there are exceptions to when proteins are actually used for fuel, as I mentioned earlier. So looking back at the ketogenic diet, the diets I typically see being consumed by athletes are certainly adhering to the low carbohydrate requirement for necessary keto, but that ratio of protein is far too high. Now, during the process of protein metabolism, these amino acids are actually being converted into glucose through a process known as gluconeogenesis. And this is why it is so important to ensure that you are providing no more than, say, 20 to 25% of your total calories from protein. Now, when bodybuilders come to me and say, oh, well, I've been following keto diet, but they're on 350 grams of protein a day, sorry, buddy, you're probably not doing keto, because the amount of protein that you're taking in is so high that it's actually resulting in glucose production anyway. So why did it come about, and who might it be useful for? So ketogenic diets gained most of their attention dating back a few years now, when it was implemented for its nutritional strategy in epilepsy. And even more recently, there's been some really positive clinical outcomes for cancer patients. And this is thought to be because of its ability to reduce tumor growth. In that sense, we know that cancer cells have a specific requirement for glucose. Now, recently, this has moved and evolved across into the bodybuilding community as a way to improve our body composition, specifically reducing body fat. Now, this notion evolved with the idea that carbohydrates are making us fat, and that insulin resistance is one of the likely causes for this obesity epidemic due to high frequent intakes of carbohydrates. So this is what I'm going to discuss with you a little bit more today. So the consumption of carbohydrate basically increases our blood sugar levels. So when we consume carbohydrate containing food, whether it is bread, cereals, grains, fruit, vegetables, dairy, these all cause a hormone to be released called insulin. Now, insulin is responsible for transporting the glucose out of our blood and into tissues, so muscle tissue, fat tissue, and various others. So this is where insulin gets its nickname, the fat storage hormone, because it has a role in transporting glucose into our fat cells. Now, as a result of this is where carbohydrate has gained such negative press. And unfortunately, most of this is a result of misinterpreted data where people are making statements that are correlation and not actual causation. And they generally have a strong negative focus on carbs. And this is why ketogenic diets are such a hot topic right now, because they offer an alternative to carbohydrate consumption. So I would like to explain this to you in a little more detail to help you understand that ketogenic diets aren't necessarily better for us when it comes to fat loss than a regular diet when we can account for a couple of key factors. So why do keto diets claim to be more superior for fat loss? So when carbohydrates are present, fats will remain inside our adipose tissue cells. But in the absence of glucose, which is provided from carbohydrate-containing foods, our insulin levels drop and the body begins to call upon fats for energy. And this is done through a process known as lipolysis. In this metabolic state, fats are able to leave the cell and are metabolized for fuel. Now, just digressing quickly, in the case of type 2 diabetes, frequent and excessive carbohydrate intake results in the phenomenon known as insulin resistance, where insulin secretion increases. When this happens, the body's skeletal muscles and adipose cells become really insensitive to that insulin that's being produced. And there is a reduced uptake of that glucose into the cell, and blood glucose becomes elevated. This has a number of negative health outcomes resulting from those elevated blood sugar levels. Now, there are a number of treatments, including drugs like metformin, sulfonylureas, and other nutritional interventions and education that are able to help improve insulin sensitivity. But this is how essentially the ketogenic diet fits in, because it offers an alternate substrate, which are the ketone bodies, for energy production. And it's an option for improving insulin resistance. It's not the only way, but it's certainly an option. So what does the research say? So there are a number of research publications on ketogenic diets, but what I want to emphasize here is that when it comes to overall body composition and fat loss, ketogenic diets are not better than a carb-containing diet when both calories and protein are equated for. And this is because high-protein diets are thermogenic and cause increased caloric expenditure and lead to greater rate of loss even when calories are equated. Let me say that again. This is because high protein diets are more thermogenic and they cause increased caloric expenditure and lead to greater loss even when calories are equated for. So when calories and protein are equal, a ketogenic diet does not seem to offer any additional fat loss benefits to an equal calorie, equal protein, non-ketogenic diet. So this is one that's still containing carbohydrate foods. And this is linked to a study published in 2006 from the American Journal of Nutrition in Arizona State. Now, a study published in 2013, it was a meta-analysis. It compared keto diets to low-fat fasts with a minimum of 12 months follow-on. Now, they did find that individuals who were assigned to the very low Now, other proven clinical health benefits of these ketogenic diets exist in medical conditions. So as I mentioned earlier, epilepsy and cancer, as well as even Alzheimer's. So in conditions like these, providing an alternative fuel source instead of carbohydrate seems to have some kind of a therapeutic effect. Now, in the case of cancer specifically, many of these cancers are glucose obligate and they require glucose for growth, but not fats and not ketones. They cannot grow. Thus, by limiting these carbohydrates from foods, it's forcing our bodies to use fats and ketones instead of carbohydrates. So there are some studies showing that ketogenic diets can have a therapeutic effect by essentially starving the tumors. What I will say, please keep in mind that this is not a cure for cancer. Some cancers are not glucose obligate, and if you do have cancer, you should always follow your oncologist's recommendations for your specific disease. Now, other studies have reported that people are experiencing less hunger when they're following a ketogenic diet, and this is thought to be related to fats being more satiating. Fats do take longer to be digested, and therefore it leads to extended feelings of fullness. Other findings have reported that there are decreased triglycerides, diastolic blood pressure, and greater or increased levels of both HDL and LDL cholesterol. But again, most of these studies do not equate for both calories and proteins. Just keep that in mind. What are my recommendations? Any nutrition plan that sees you in a caloric deficit is going to result in fat loss. Now, if you prefer high-fat foods over carbohydrate-containing foods, particularly if you're trying to adhere to a low-caloric intake, it might be for a contest, it might be that you're a regular mom or dad, you're just looking to achieve a little bit of fat loss. But if you find it easier to adhere to a ketogenic diet, more so than one that is carbohydrate containing, then do it. It is about sustainability. For me personally, I really like carbohydrate containing foods. I love pasta, I love rice, I love muesli, I love cereal, bacon and egg muffins, and I really love fruit and dairy. So I'm essentially stuffed if I was trying to adhere to a ketogenic diet. So that would not work for me when it comes to caloric restriction. Other people really are quite happy with high fat foods. So avocado, full cream products, cheese, bacon, meat products, and things like that. What I will say from a nutrition standpoint is when I'm preparing ketogenic diets for my clients, it is far more difficult for me to achieve nutritional balance when it comes to your micronutrient intakes. So getting all of those vitamins and minerals that are typically found in our carbohydrate-containing foods, particularly grains, breads and cereals, it does make it very challenging. So what I will recommend is if you are going to follow a ketogenic diet, make sure that you are taking a multivitamin of some description, just to make sure that you are giving yourself the best chance to get your micronutrients in. I'm going to leave it at that for today. I hope that is of some value to you. If you'd like to learn anything else about your nutrition, your dietary requirements, you're more than welcome to contact me. I will list my email address just along the bottom here for you, along as a link to my website. Other than that, have a really great day, guys.